Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Jason Lehman. I'm the marketing team lead here at Fishbowl Solutions. We're doing our next WebCenter tips and tricks session today, covering how to use Oracle WebCenter Rules and Profiles to drive more effective content management. Happy to be joined by my colleague, my esteemed colleague, Jerry Aber. Hi, Jerry.
Hi, Jason. How you doing?
Doing well, thank you. And again, thanks for attending. We're going to spend 30 minutes covering this topic. In terms of what we're going to cover today, we really want to get into, these tips and tricks sessions, giving you more information, with these topics, having you better understand what's capable out of the box with Oracle Web Center. And rules and profiles obviously go way back. They go way back to the Stellent days, and we just want to make you more aware of them and how you can use them more effectively. So as we cover those topics today, and Jerry gives you a demo, for those of you not doing rules and profiles, or for those companies that feel they can do it more effectively, we're going to show you how to get started with that. Quick overview of Fishbowl Solutions. So again, our goal is to help customers solve their costly and frustrating knowledge sharing problems. Since 1999, we've been working with Oracle Web Center, specialized in enterprise content management and portal solutions to help organizations like you better manage, retain, and distribute content through enhanced desktop and mobile experiences. We also help organizations leverage Oracle's Content Experience Cloud, or CX content, really focusing on developing omni-channel experiences for their digital content. Most recently, we've been working with the Oracle Digital Assistant to develop digital assistants or chatbots for customer and employee service, as well as developing mobile applications using Oracle's mobile cloud platform. And to help you find all that high-value content in the organization, we provide enterprise search software and services for both on-premise and cloud-based use cases, leveraging MindBreeze and Google Cloud. But why we're here, so I touched on this a little bit in the agenda. Again, we understand we want to make you more aware of Web Center's capabilities out of the box, including some of the kind of back-to-basics capabilities, and that includes rules and profiles, to again, just help you, leverage the system more and get more value out of the system. So we're going to talk through kind of some of the business problems if you're not using rules and profiles today, or if you're using them, or if you're just using, one or two or a couple profiles, some of the business problems that can cause. We'll then go into what's included as you look at rules and profiles and the other associated components, triggers, how you can use those and leverage those within Web Center. And then Jerry in the demo will show you how to configure the rules and profiles within Web Center. So with that, I'm turning it over to Jerry.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks for being here today. Kind of jump right in. So some of the challenges we've seen over the years, like Jason said, this has been out there for quite a long time. And we see different experiences when we get a peek at customers' systems when they ask us to kind of get involved for projects or rolling things out and making Web Center a better place to participate with their organizational enterprise content. A lot of times we'll go peek into people's systems, we'll see screens just like this, a number of metadata fields, not really organized, maybe 1, 2 profiles, and that generates some opinions and some views by your business customers as to why should I use this and what's the purpose of using this system if I have to manage all these fields and so forth. So what we normally see is there's too many fields, so nobody bothers to check stuff in. And if they don't check that stuff in, you start getting some disparate repositories, a lack of document control, and the ability to kind of have some insight in that knowledge sharing. And you get a lot of duplication because it's not being managed properly before it goes in, and you're ending up with that duplication. The user will tend to fill out the form, but only fill out the required fields, because metadata fields can be required or open and optional, but then the content becomes harder to find. It's harder to target that content if you're using that system to drive interactions with your content, and it's hard to link to any process, and there's really no lack of ownership. So in the perfect world, you would set up a content server so that Department A or Department B work with that content server like it is their own, like they're the only ones in there. You might see public content, you might see content that gets shared, but the content you manage is driven by your profiles and your interaction with that site. So some of the places Web Center rules and profiles can help. It can shorten check-in forms and default metadata, kind of speed those check-ins for you, and we'll show you what those kind of differences look like today. It can also, content is then easier to find due to more targeted metadata value. So the less you fill out information that you deemed necessary when the system was configured, you lack the ability to find that and make it searchable, findable, and reusable. And lastly, the users take more ownership over the content and the processes that drive that content. Sometimes it's tied to the workflow within the system. Sometimes it's processes outside of that. But it's all about giving them the right picture when it comes to working with the site. So we'll talk a little bit about profiles and rules. So just a quick definition of these profiles. I like to use the term, what a profile is basically that first decision in you segmenting your content, whether it's by department, line of business, business process, type of asset, and what does it make that department or area look like and work with their experience in terms of how they check in content, search content, update metadata. So it's that first decision, whether I'm calling it an invoice type or whether I'm making it a corrective action process or I'm kicking it into some kind of request process or a flow, that experience is important for them to come back and use it. The adoption rate tends to go down if things are not configured in a manner that helps people see things that's useful to them. Profiles basically limit the information that's displayed on those pages and makes it easier for users to enter and manage as they go along. So a profile, in short, is basically made up of rules and trigger values. And those rules are usable across different profiles. So they're editable. There's evaluation of global and non-global rules in there and rules that can be applied to profiles. And most commonly, the ones that you see when it comes to working with the system visually are going to be the ones that are built up and mapped to profiles so that people see them. Rules can also be set global and made to work behind the scenes. And triggers are basically those metadata fields that if your document matches something that triggers that activity, that behavior will occur and it will trigger that profile to show up and interact with that user for updating metadata, searching, or doing content injection. So briefly, let's kind of dig a little bit at the core of what the experience is from a rules perspective. Basically, rules are mandatory when profiles are optional. So you don't have to have a profile, but if you do have a rule to organize some of that metadata, that rule becomes mandatory. You can use a global rule on that, or you can use kind of simple profiles and expose those rules through those simple profiles. Rules can be optional with conditions if they're global, and they can be combined together to form a profile. So for example, I could have 4 different rule sections or segments that can be used on 1 or more different profiles, and I'll show you how that looks today. And then several fields can be added to the same rule. So for example, field 1 and field 2 can be added to rule 1 and rule 3, and you can share those across. So you're getting some economy of scale in terms of managing those as well. And it's not necessarily a best practice to use metadata for multiple types of purposes. That would then work against this rule definition, the metadata that are defined in the rules that eventually show up in profiles. A little bit more on the deep dive from a rules perspective as we dig a little deeper. So, you can customize the content servers and pages be driven by the rules engine. And they define whether a field is hidden, grouped, required, or excluded, or any kind of configuration you want to put on that field. So then when it shows up on the page, by definition, it reacts and behaves that way. Many times when you hide fields, for example, those are things that you might want to use to derive other values. And I'll show you where you can put some script in there to kind of drive that hidden value to drive some other behavior. And those rules can consist of metadata values and attributes. There's optional evaluation conditions, like I mentioned the global piece before, and then there's an option to specify grouping. One of the best practice events that we can get across today is that whole idea of grouping and providing that visual effect so you can break up how the people see their page as they're working through their metadata. Good thing to kind of remember when rules are evaluated, there is a precedence order. Like I mentioned, there's a global rule that's always on, and that global rule basically automatically affects the metadata field displayed on check-in, update, or the content information page and search pages, even if there's no profile to be created. And there might be some business activities or rules you might do behind the scenes that would trigger a global rule to be used. Each global rule is a priority number, so you can move that up or down in terms of an evaluation step. And the higher, the higher numbers have a higher precedent, and the lower numbers are going to end up with a lower precedent and can be overridden. The profiles I talk about should use non-global rules. Basically, there's a flag that you set when you're in there defining a rule as global or non-global, and a priority value for that. You want to make sure that's unchecked so that you can use those rules within the profiles. And this allows you to get really creative in terms of that experience. Then the activation conditions are evaluated before rules are activated, so they are flexible for you to leverage them that way. As you dig down into the rules, attributes can help drive the configuration to be a more targeted experience. So you can kind of drive where it sits on the screen, you can drive the display type, whether it's hidden or required. And if you have a required message, so for example, you flip it to say, you can't move on, you can't save that content item until this value is put in or selected, then you can decide what required message you want to provide back to the user in that case. Then there are 3 very interesting, very powerful components of that rule attribute, and those are the default value, derived value, and restricted list. Those allow you to set kind of default values working with the metadata value and the rule, but the more important one is the derived value, or each of those 3 you can put in some IDOC script for those of you familiar with a little bit of coding around the content server side, and you can drive dynamic experiences as a result of that. You can have it automatically set some things up, you can set the navigation, you can drive metadata values behind the scenes, you can trigger workflow activities and so forth behind the scenes. So it's a very powerful tool. We do a lot of IDOC scripting within those areas. Just to summarize on the profile side of things, this is basically what I said, it limits the information that's displayed on the page. It's very, very important to only show the metadata that's important to that user business problem and that user type of content management. Showing them all the fields really turns them off, and then obviously impacts your adoption over time. And just remember that a profile is basically comprised of the rules and a trigger value. And that trigger value is based on a trigger field that you can tie to a piece of metadata. A little bit more on the profile trigger as we kind of dig into that piece. So, profile, like I said, is composed of rules and trigger value. And it kind of helps let you know what needs to take place when that document is checked in. So if you have a metadata value, you have to set that metadata value up and then tie that to that profile trigger so that metadata value, when it's selected and evaluated, triggers that profile appropriately to show you the right information. Basically pare down the screen so you see only what you need to see. For example, the image on the right there shows us that our cascading new check-in profiles will be driven by this, and when I click on the brochure, that profile doc type will trigger that experience to show me just a brochure check-in profile. So when you take a look and take into account and look at the profile architecture, you get a sense of kind of how the pieces work together. Rules from the bottom up are created, metadata is created first, obviously, but rules that include metadata are attached to profiles, and rules can be attached to any combination of profiles. And then those profiles are used when you use the search page, the check-in page, the info page, or the update page. And you may have a global rule that gets triggered behind the scenes as a result of that. But the real power is make sure you can orchestrate and organize that content metadata values into useful rules that make sense. For example, if you have, when you look across different departments and content types you might be managing, there might be a set of dates that you use on each and every profile. You can create that date rule one time and then just relate it to all the profiles you want to inherit that rule information. So I'm going to start with the admin applets, just in case we don't have somebody on, or we have somebody on the call that has never used the admin applets before. You trigger that by clicking the admin applets option here under the administration drop-down menu, and only administrators can see this. Usually the configuration manager is the one that's most used, and when you go through this process, you'll download an admin applet, it's called. And after that's downloaded, you upload this, or excuse me, you open this admin applet. And once that's open, if you don't have a problem with your version of your Java on your laptop or your desktop, you will get this prompt to run that Java applet. One of the main problems our customers see is trying to run this applets with a different version of Java because their laptop or desktop needs to run other apps that need a different version of Java. And when you open up the configuration manager, you get access to these various options in terms of application fields, and profiles and rules are the two that we'll be talking about today. What I am going to do, just to kind of entice you a little bit, to be honest, is to show you how we do this without using the admin applets, because we have a different add-on under what we call Admin Suite that's a more browser-based experience and does not require you to have that Java requirement on your desktop or your laptop to run that Java applet. And it's a responsive web page that's built right into the user experience from WebCenter content perspective that allows me to work with the same tabs, plus a couple more that were in the drop-downs of that configuration manager, and manage my rules and my profiles. So let's jump into a couple examples here in terms of the rules and profiles to show you how things work. So building a rule is all about just kind of going through an ad and then giving a name, deciding if it's a global priority or whether it's a group, and then adding the fields to it. And you pick those fields from the various available fields that you have on your content server, ones that came out of the box when it was installed, and ones you might have added as a result of your own metadata configurations. So I'll show you one that's already kind of pre-built here. I have one called Contract Progress, and when I edit that field, and when I look at this particular configuration, it's not a global role and it does have a group, which I'll show what that looks like in a minute. I do have 2 fields on there, and I can add more fields and reorder them so that they show up a certain way on this list. But what shows up on the content server profile is when I look at a demo profile, for example, here, this configuration is a profile that has been set up with a couple of rules, some base fields out of the box, and then two rules, one that's broke, one that does not have a header, and one that does have a header. Compare that to this corrective action one, which just has certain basic fields, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute when I make some changes. And I'll be jumping over to the demo sample as well. That one does not have that contract progress rule on it. So what I can do when I work with profiles is I can find my demo profiles that I have set up, and it's the demo sample one that I want to edit. And I edit this profile, and it will bring me to a place where I can add rules to it. And so within the profile, I can define the name of it, description, and what might trigger it. And if I trigger something, this is called an NBN demo trigger, then I can add some rules to it. Now, the only flow that's on there, the only, rule that's on this profile right now, outside of the out-of-the-box fields, is the ad hoc workflow, which is this rule you see down here. I'm going to add another one on, and I'll pick it from a list of rules. So after you've created your rules, you can select them from the add rule drop-down box and add them to my rule definition. And when I refresh that page and go back into the demo sample, I will have contract progress and contract due date, two fields that are defined on that rule. That same rule is being used in the demo profile in a similar configuration. What you can do to kind of pretty things up, and I highly recommend doing this in every installation we work with, is that when you are working with your rules, you want to make sure that you can provide a header for them. And that header allows you to do a number of different things, and one is to give you a little HTML banner that kind of breaks it up so you can collapse and hide that and default that if you wish as a result of the configuration. I'll refresh that, and it'll put this contract progress bar on top of it, which helps basically give me a visual cue that these are my contract progress fields and these are my workflow fields. I will see that on any profile that I have that rule assigned to. It's very handy in terms of orchestrating the important information you might want to see across the number of profiles you might use. And if you happen to need many fields on there to check your stuff in, and you might have 3 or 4 or 5 sections on there that you can show or hide in terms of working with that experience. Very handy to get the visuals. We get a lot of feedback on that. And there's other ways to kind of provide some additional configuration of how that looks as well. There's some lines when you are working with the different types of profiles that will put the bar down here. It's just a little separator line, different type of visual effect. So I'm going to go over and show you the content check-in page for corrective action. So this is one kind of scenario where it's not set up as a rule per se. Let me set the stage with you with the different rule I have here for corrective action. This rule is a very simple definition that only has the one field on it, the doc type. The way this one particularly works is there's no fields added to it because it's leveraging a trigger to decide all the fields it wants to bring on there so that I can decide on my rule whether or not I want to show those values or not. When I edit the profile, it has the corrective action rule, but this value is only using all the values, and the script I'll go back to in a second has a trigger value in there that says it turns certain things off. So this exclude non-rule fields allows me to show or hide all the fields that are not part of the rule definition. So when I look at this thing again, it brings back all the fields because I just included everything in that rule. And in my rule definition, or my profile definition, I can decide whether or not to exclude or include non-rule fields. So it's a little bit of the opposite of putting all your effort into a number of rules and just putting one rule out there and having a value set on that so you can show or hide the information that's on there. The rule, when you look at it in terms of behind the scenes, there's only default values, corrective action. So this trigger right here is basically setting that experience so I can use the profile definition of enabling or hiding those values. So hopefully that makes sense. I do want to show you one other type of experience from the behind the scenes, that when you are working with, when you are wanting to put more logic behind your profiles, you can edit these standard work fields, and in the field definition itself, for example, like review date, this one is hidden when the review cycle is edited. When I open this up, you can put code in here that evaluates any field that's on the form and rule definition you have. This one is a hidden field, and it will automatically tag some values as monthly, quarterly, or yearly in order to do a periodic review type scenario. And you can put all kinds of code in here to provide all kinds of derived or evaluated values, so you don't have to ask the customer or the user to type those in or select them. So you can kind of data chain them, and based on how they select certain values, you can assign other values out of the default values that are available for that field, or derive some new values, and even assign security accounts. A nice little feature as well when you're working with rules and profiles is you can daisy chain them to kind of provide a different type of experience. And when you are working with these profiles, don't forget that you can put security evaluations in them, so that when that user logs in, they only see the ones they're allowed to see based on that security. You can use that definition, create that account without even going through a security group, and use our advanced user security mapping tool to map that account to that user, and then manage the access to those profiles very easily. So hopefully that gave you a quick view of how to work with the profiles and the rules and the flexibility you have across your system to give a better user experience. I will flip back to the presentation and close the last piece of this out with just give you understanding what Admin Suite is, because I was demoing using the Admin Suite tool rather than a little bit of a cumbersome business that would have been through using the admin applets, and I didn't have to go through that download process to do that. So I encourage you to kind of look at our website and look at our YouTube channel to look at videos about Admin Suite. Some details around that is basically a complete replacement for the admin applets, so that you can provide experiences with that to your admins without having to go through the admin applets itself. It's a common 11G or 12C type of problem to deal with in terms of the admin downloads, and users who might have Java accessibility issues with that desktop or laptop. So you basically get to use all of those same capabilities that are in the admin applets for configuration, system properties, user admin, workflow, and repository manager. Very handy tool, and it's less time overall on administrating it. I use it constantly, especially when I'm on ARM systems here. So kind of just to summarize, I can't stress enough that rules and profiles are there and be driven by the metadata that you have in your system. Try and stay away from as much of the single purpose use profiles that you might have on your system, so that your users can get direct access to the things they need to use from a search or check-in perspective. And make sure those rules have the required metadata fields on them you need to drive that experience. And just remember, rules are required, profiles are optional. Metadata fields can be part of the same rule and shared across multiple profiles as part of that configuration. And make sure it's important if you don't understand how to do this, you can surely reach out to us and we can talk to how that early stage of that taxonomy breakout might work, because we truly believe that segmentation of your content based on those profiles is that first level of that taxonomy and that segmentation. All right, so I think that closes it up for myself.
One question that comes to mind, Jerry, this seems so straightforward and obvious, but, from your perspective and working with customers for 10 plus years, why aren't more customers, really taking advantage of rules and profiles?
It's hit and miss with different customers, but the first and foremost is they're busy and they're doing their day jobs, and this tends to be a secondary activity for them. So what they'll do is they'll give them the easiest part. So they maybe not, the administrators or whoever's on the system does not know how to draw the right questions and answers out of them in order to make that first level of segmentation to set up the right profile. So they set up the basic one, and then they run from there, and they just leave it alone else, and they're distracted on something else, and all of a sudden the end user are getting a little bit disenchanted, and they're doing some Googling, trying to find, there's got to be a better way to do this, and there are.
Sure. Okay, I want to thank everyone for attending, and we will be back in touch soon. Thank you.